We're joined now by Oren Cass, Executive Director over at American Compass, which is working on coming up with a plan, an economic agenda for the Republican Party that would actually be an agenda that benefits the working class and would enable Republicans to be a party that helps the working class. I know there's a lot of skepticism about that. Oren, thank you so much for joining us.
Thanks for having me.
Well, Oren, let's start with some of your postmortem tweets here. I really liked the way that you put it. We have the thread from Oren that we can pop up on the screen. Political realignment continues apace, you said. The opportunity to translate a multi-ethnic working class conservatism into a durable government majority is just sitting there staring at everyone. While Trump spurred a working class realignment, he does not have the formula for conservatives to capitalize on it. Oren, tell us why you think the midterms kind of evidenced that, especially since there's been a lot of chatter kind of in our circles on the right about how the Republican Party just didn't have a message to working class voters. You saw Fetterman run up the numbers in places like Erie County that should be, in an ideal world, I don't know if Dr. Oz is ever going to be the vehicle for a real pro-working class message, but that should be, a prime opportunity for a post-Trump Republican Party to take this message to folks in places like Erie County. What happened?
Well, Erie County is a great example. And to your point, what did Republicans bring to them? I think we're at a really interesting point on the right where what used to be has been knocked over as it needed to be. I don't think anyone is envisioning sort of 2014 Paul Ryanism as the future of the Republican Party, but there isn't really anything new yet. I mean, there really wasn't an agenda that Republicans were running on. And in a lot of cases, it's not clear what candidates were representing or what the pitch was besides we're not Democrats. And I think we've seen for a while now, when each party runs as just we're not the other party, it's a great way to kind of land at a 50-50 nation. But at the same time, and you see this in places like Florida, where you had candidates like Governor DeSantis and Senator Rubio, who really were running on a clear agenda. If you combine social conservatism with a real commitment to an economic agenda that pays attention to workers, there's a real majority there. And we just, I think, need more people to focus on that. And as you said, we're doing a lot of the work at American Compass to try to develop what that economic agenda could be. But then you need elected leaders to actually, or candidates to realize that has to be a part of the message too.
And so our colleague Crystal Ball has a piece actually in Lever News this morning, headlined the real reason for Dems' Rust Belt revival. And she makes the case that in the industrial Midwest, and lumping Pennsylvania in there too, that Democrats on top of abortion really did run on economic populism in a way that was distinct than, say, New York or say California or Oregon.
Alyssa Slotkin.
Yeah, and that was a key difference. Did you notice a difference in the Democratic competition around the country? And is it your sense from the right that Democrats who embraced populism, economic populism, performed better?
Well, I think, frankly, at the sort of House race level or even Senate races, it felt like it came down an awful lot to sort of national environment and the specifics of candidates. I do think if you look at the Democratic Party generally, it's important to notice how, for instance, Joe Biden differs from Barack Obama. I mean, the White House is certainly doing things on, for instance, reshoring industry, focusing on labor in a way that I think the kind of Clinton-Obama Democrats have really gotten away from. But of course, the flip side is that gets paired with this extreme social progressivism that then makes everything about either just outright social and identity issues or climate change and, forgiving student loans. And so at the end of the day, I think you're right. There are Democrats who do get this, just as there are Republicans who get this. But the Democratic Party as a whole is so beholden at this point to this progressive bubble that seems to dictate what they think the country cares about, that it's hard to see the Democratic Party actually going in this direction. And that's why, as Emily noticed in the tweet, I said, this opportunity is just sitting there staring at everybody. I mean, there's certainly a hypothetical world where the left of center kind of goes in this direction. I don't think that's where we are in America today. I think there's a much better chance that the right of center that has the right message on so many values-related questions and is at least open at this point to taking workers' interests seriously on the economic side, I think that's the right coalition, and I think we're moving in that direction. But it may be that it also takes some failures and people realizing that if you don't have that, it doesn't work, for people to really dig in and start focusing on this stuff.
Oren, again, I mentioned this in the introduction, but at American Compass, you've put out basically a plan, and it's still kind of hard to envision, a Ron Johnson who squeaked out a win in Wisconsin, certainly a Dr. Oz, taking this to, Erie County, to rural areas of Wisconsin and making this case and being willing, Ron Johnson was someone who came in on the Tea Party wave, business guy, being sort of open to what it would take. I mean, the Republican Party can talk until it's blue in the face about the new working class multi-ethnic coalition and how Donald Trump changed the party forever and won those Rust Belt counties that were Obama-Trump country. But unless you actually come up, you can't run on vibes. You have to actually bite the bullet and piss off some of your corporate benefactors. And I think some of the ideas that you've laid out that would involve biting the bullet for some folks. Or what should Republicans be running on? What are some very specific points in your plan?
Yeah, thanks for bringing that up. We released right after the polls closed pretty much what we're calling New Direction, which tries to outline what this kind of economic agenda would look like. And as you said, I think we've got kind of 8 different sections, but starting at the top, one really big one is the idea of reshoring industry. And recognizing that manufacturing matters, other forms of industry and the physical economy matter. And you can't have a flourishing economy where you say, we'll just design everything in California and make everything somewhere else. And so I think there's a lot of really substantive things we can do on trade policy, on industrial policy that would really make a big difference in making America a place where people want to invest, create good jobs, and manufacture things, which then also is where the research and the innovation and the progress comes from. So that we think is one really important area of focus. A second is non-college pathways. We've, including the Republican Party, focused for so long on just, we're going to basically find a way to get everybody into and through college and pay for it somehow. And that just doesn't work. Most Americans don't have a college degree. A huge majority are not sort of going high school, college career. And so really shifting investment to non-college pathways and ways to get into the workforce, get on the job training, I think is super important. And then just to mention one more, we think family policy is really important. Families generally are struggling. The very idea of the family in America is struggling. Marriage rates are down, birth rates are down. And we have to have strong families, first and foremost, for their own sake. That's sort of the end goal here in a lot of ways. But also if we want to have thriving communities and a strong economy. And so, look, I think you're right. Someone like Ron Johnson probably isn't going to head in this direction, or at least maybe need to be dragged in this direction. But I think if you look at who the real emerging leaders are in the Republican Party, folks in the Senate like Marco Rubio, Josh Hawley, Tom Cotton,
J.D. Vance.
And I was about to say, folks, he's not there yet. But someone like J.D. Vance, I'll certainly take my chances if you're asking whether the party is going to head in the direction of Ron Johnson or J.D. Vance. And so I think in the medium to the long term, things are really promising. But to steal a phrase from the left, we have to do the work and we have to actually develop the ideas and the platform. It has to be built on a coherent set of principles. And so that's what we're doing at American Compass. And hopefully as we head into the next election cycle, we'll have a lot more candidates who are ready to focus on this.
I wanted to pick up on one thing you had said in one of your earlier answers about student debt coming from kind of a bubble about what people don't really understand. And I want to press you on that because I'm wondering if you're kind of relying on kind of a mythologized version of what the American working class is rather than kind of what the actual American working class is, because it's easy to caricature anybody who went to college as some woke Oberlin grad who has rich parents and just wants a bailout so they can go get their multicultural studies master's degree or whatever, whatever it is. But if you look at the actual data, or you go around the country, something like more than 65% of the country have some college. Roughly, maybe I think it's between 35 and 40% of people have bachelor's degrees or higher. And so that means you've got 25% of people who have some college.
But they're disproportionately going to be white collar.
Not the people, I think, who didn't graduate, like who spent several years in college, racked up a whole bunch of debt, something went wrong, they're now they're paycheck to paycheck, but they're sitting there with $15,000 in student loan debt for a degree that they don't even have. I think there are a lot of people who are struggling with debt who you would look at and meet and say, this is a working class person.
Sure. Yeah.
Who benefits from student debt cancellation and who is not an Oberlin graduate.
What do you think, Oren?
No, I think that's absolutely right. And that's a point we try to emphasize at American Compass when you're talking about the educational attainment of the population. We talk about in sort of 5 roughly equal groups. You still have a close to a fifth of the country that doesn't earn a meaningful high school degree. And we should keep that in mind. You've got about 20% who never go to college. Exactly to your point, you have about 20% who enroll but don't complete. And that's really important to remember that even of those who hold degrees, barely over half then go into a job that requires a degree. So even among college graduates, you have an awful lot of folks for whom it hasn't worked. And you really get down to about 20% who have actually gone high school to college to career the way the system is intended. And so I don't by any means to suggest there aren't working class people who are struggling with student debt. And one thing we've proposed at American Compass is that we should just treat student debt like other debt. There are people struggling with all sorts of debt. The problem is that student debt is uniquely not dischargeable in bankruptcy. And so what we would say is stop mythologizing student debt and spending on higher education, and recognize that it's not something that works for everybody, that people who have been burdened by it and can't get out from under it should have a way to get out from under it. But then, my gosh, you have to pair that with reforms to the underlying system. You can't do $500 billion of student debt forgiveness and not admit that this means the higher education system is a total failure and has to be overhauled and has to stop being funded this way. And what you get instead from the White House is here's $500 billion, essentially just flung out of helicopters with very little to concern for who actually needs the assistance. And by the way, we're just going to double down on recreating the exact same problem going forward. And that's what you get from the progressive bubble. And that's what's not responsive to what would actually benefit the working class, which is in most cases, other pathways that come with public support that get you connected to a good job.
Not to make this all about student debt, but in the past, there was a policy that allowed you to discharge student debt through bankruptcy. And what was happening is you'd have a bunch of very young people, a lot of law students who would then come out with these huge amounts of debt, discharge all of it. And because they were 23, 24 years old, they didn't have any assets, even if their parents were super rich. And then they have the repercussions of bankruptcy, but otherwise they're cruising, and so it's not, the benefit seemed to be disproportionately available to people who were in that situation. But I don't know if you have any, you want to respond to that, but I also wanted to ask,
real quickly, I don't mean to be a rude guest, but I just don't think that's a very accurate characterization. We did a bunch of research on this for this exact proposal, and it was all the way back in the 1970s at a point where virtually no one was actually defaulting on their debt.
Is that a myth that a bunch of people were? It is.
The rate had increased, but you have to remember that how little college cost, how little that student debt was in the 1970s. This
might have been just a media panic that
it was a preemptive overreaction. And again, the question is, why is student debt different, right? I mean, somebody could, this law student you're describing could also go out, rack up tons of credit card debt and declare bankruptcy. And we don't have the same reaction. So will there be situations where it gets taken advantage of? Sure there will. But compared to the system we have now, it would be a vastly better and fairer one. And the last thing I'd say is I think it's really important not to minimize, you sort of glossed over, they bear the consequences of bankruptcy. the consequences of bankruptcy are huge. The reason our system works is that we have a very lenient system in the sense that if you want to declare bankruptcy, you can, much more lenient than, say, in Europe. But not many people do it because declaring bankruptcy is incredibly costly in all sorts of ways, financially, reputationally, for a very long time. And so we actually have a very good system, I would say, in America that says, look, if you're somebody who feels like those costs are actually worth bearing because of your situation, then we actually want to allow you to do that. And far from causing some collapse of our consumer credit system, we obviously have a quite large consumer credit system. So I don't think we should sort of turn away from a bankruptcy system that's worked so well. We should recognize that student debt is just debt. And spending on higher education is just one way people spend money. And it's not some special mythical status because you're in the ivory tower and that gets treated differently than everything else in society.
And I do love the idea about reinvesting in skills and vocational training.
Yeah.
What has bothered me about it is that it's seen as two tracks. Like one crew goes off and does the AP classes, and then it goes to college, and the other crew gets shop and mechanics. And we ought to have that option of shop and mechanics, but I think the AP kids need that too. Like it's pathetic that nobody can fix
100%.
anything anymore.
Soft hands.
Yes, and everybody should be in both of these. Yeah, all these just absolutely soft hands, just two soft hands out there.
Ryan did bring a makeup bag to work today, but other than that.
That's true. Pink one. Pink makeup bag.
Folks can read actually about Oren's plans for that pipeline over at the American Compass website. Oren, this stuff is so interesting and it's really serious, and just appreciate you coming on to chat about it.
Really glad you guys are talking about it. Thanks for having me.
Of course. Well, that does it for us today at Counterpoints Friday. That does it for us this week because we've been around a lot this week. Thanks for hanging in there with us. Actually, a big thanks to the crew and a big thanks to Ryan. I had an early schedule today, so everyone had to wake up early. And
you're getting to watch this earlier because
That's right. That's right. And we got our coffee. So we're good to go.
Good to go.
But I hope everybody's having a good weekend. I know it's about to get really cold in the Midwest, and there's a lot of fallout from the hurricane here on the East Coast. So hope everybody stays safe and warm.
Have fun refreshing those vote tallies, and have a great weekend.
Cable news is ripping us apart, dividing the country, making it impossible to function as a society, and making it impossible to know just what is true and what is false. But the good news is they are failing, and they know it.
That is why we're building something new, a new mainstream, a healthier one, something more trustworthy, something that we are going to need in one of the most pivotal times in American history. We are building up here for the midterms, for the upcoming presidential election, but we need your help. So if you can help us out by becoming a premium member today at breakingpoints.com, we're trying to change America for the better and the entire world.
So what are you waiting for, guys? Go to breakingpoints.com and sign up and help us build a new mainstream.